Salams and good day, everyone. Welcome to another talk organized by your MIT Pakistan Alumni Lecture Series Committee. I am Sulaiman Malik from your MIT Pak LSC, which also includes Anwar Hussain, Saeed Osaf Ahmed, Aisha Shahid, and Fazl Abbas. Today, on Sunday, 17th January 2021, we are featuring Mr. Kazi Zulkader Siddiqui, MIT class of 1974, whose talk is titled Bani Israel, an Early Israelite and Jewish History. Please note this talk and its Q&A session is being recorded. Mr. Kazi Zulkader Siddiqui is a businessman, academician, and social worker. His contributions towards social sector development, academics, and business leadership have been recognized in Pakistan and other countries. He's also known for his lectures and writings on various areas of human, social, and professional responsibility and Muslim thought in Pakistan and elsewhere. He has a bachelor's in chemical engineering from MIT and has pursued graduate studies at McGill University's Institute of Islamic Studies. So I'll request all our friends here to kindly mute their microphones, and it's over to you, Kazi Saab.
Thank you very much, Salek. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. This is my second opportunity to make a presentation to this August group here. And it's a subject which does draw quite a lot of interest in various quarters, but I have come to realize that in particular amongst us Muslims, very few have a real understanding of the subject. So I'm sure that there will be a lot of surprises for you as I progress through this. And I remember the first time I took this course at McGill, that was back in 1978, I think 77 or 78, when I took this course. And my teacher was a Jewish, she was a rank of a rabbi, professor at McGill Department of Faculty of Religion. And it was a course on the Old Testament, the history of the Old Testament and the Old Testament times. It was truly a revelation for me. And over the years, I have had to go through a lot of thinking backwards, trying to understand through the Quranic perspective and through the Muslim historical perspective to try and piece together much of the information that I acquired during that period at McGill, and to try to relate it to how we should perceive all of this. So what you're going to hear from me today is based a lot on Western sources or Western research on the Bible, the Old Testament and the Old Testament times, the history of the Jews and the Bani Israel. And also, I have drawn certain conclusions of my own as well. So it's going to be a kind of a mixture, and inshallah, we will go through it. Let me first try to share my screen with you. Let me see, how do I share the screen? Yes, okay, here it is. Can you see my screen?
Gee, we can. We are currently seeing
okay,
the
good. Excellent. So let me turn this on to actually, I think yeah, I should. What was that in the show taskbar? I should say. What did we say last time? No, we don't want to show the taskbar. And the display settings, okay, now I think it's a full screen, is it?
Yes, it is. Perfect. Thank you, sir.
Kazi, assalamu alaikum, Saima here. Just if you can take like a minute to tell us a little bit about the journey from MIT Chemical Engineering to McGill Islamic, this Center for Islamic Studies, just for our, so we have a bit more context also. It doesn't have to be long, just 1 minute. Sorry for interrupting.
All right, okay, Sam. I'm going to be extremely brief because that is a story in itself. When I landed at MIT, that was the Labor Day, early September of 1971, when Pakistan India was poised to attack East Pakistan. And those next 3 months, that is until December, it was a state of mental anguish and turmoil, eventually leading to the fall of Dhaka. And 16th of December 1971, though it was traumatic for Pakistan, it was also traumatic for many of us, including myself. It led to a lot of questioning, self-questioning about our own identity as Muslims, as Pakistanis, as to what we should be and what we should be doing. That was the start of that journey, I would say, where I wanted to get into a self-discovery mode. And by the time I was in my senior year, I had decided that I really wanted to take a break. And I wanted to understand this very important aspect of my own identity, let's put it this way. And that's what eventually took me to McGill. And I joined McGill and I spent 5 years learning primarily about Muslim history, because the Western studies are primarily about history. They're not that much about the theological side. So that was very interesting. So inshallah, maybe at some other point, I might go into more detail about all that I went through on there. Okay, going back here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Simon. So today's talk is, as we said, about Bani Israel and the early Israelite and Jewish history. There is a tremendous amount of material that I would have liked to cover. And you can imagine that I'm trying to compress my full year's course into an hour and a half or so. So it's going to be a lot of summarization of many of those details. And I'll have to be skipping a tremendous amount, which is quite natural, but I think it'll give you a very good understanding of what had transpired during that early period. Before I get into the actual historical side of it, I wanted to share some comments about history in light of Quranic and worldly perspectives. Firstly, as the Quran says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لقد كان في قصصهم عبرة لأولي الألباب ما كان حديثا يفترى ولكن تصديق الذي بين يديه وتفصيل كل شيء وهدى ورحمة لقوم يؤمنون. It is their stories, there is certainty, a lesson for men of understanding. Now, this is so important. In their stories, there is let me read that again. In their stories, there is certainly a lesson for men of understanding. It is not a narrative which could be forged, but a verification of what is before it, and a distinct explanation of all things, and a guide and a mercy to a people who believe. In another verse of the Quran, it says, تِلْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الْغَيْبِ نُوحِيهَا إِلَيْكَ مَا كُنْتَ تَعْلَمُهَا أَنْتَ وَلَا قَوْمُكَ مِنْ قَبْلِ هَذَا فَاصْبِرْ إِنَّ الْعَاقِبَةَ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Such are some of the stories of the unseen, which we have revealed unto you. Before this, neither you nor your people knew them. So persevere patiently, for the end is for those who are righteous. Now, if you see the thread through this, the Quran is talking primarily about learning from our past. It has the stories of prophets and people of the past. And these, according to the Quran, are not for entertainment. These are not stories just to be told to your children so that they could just have a nice imagination. No, it is far beyond that. It is so that we can learn from that history and learn to be a righteous people. I'm sure you have all heard of the famous historian, the Muslim historian Ibn Khaldun, who is quoted extensively even in Western histories. Ibn Khaldun wrote I think his entire work was around 30 volumes. But we all have heard only about his Muqaddimah. The Muqaddimah is a 3-volume work, which is only the introduction to his book of history. So we all think that his work is the Muqaddimah. The Muqaddimah is not his work. It is, of course, it is his work, but it is only the introduction. The actual work, the actual book of history is known as the Kitabul Ibar. Ibar comes from the word Ibrat. It is the book of learning lessons of our past, of our history. And that is essentially in line with the Quranic perspective, that these stories that are scattered through the Quran are told so that we can learn from it. And learning from it, we may be able to be guided towards the right path. That we should not repeat the same mistakes that were committed by those before us, that we learn from them. History demonstrates how arrogance of people of the past and their disobedience has led to their destruction. And that destruction is so much in line with that ego that is within us, that where we feel that only we know and we can determine our destiny. That's where man has gone wrong, and the Quran brings us back to this very important principle. So the study of history is extremely important. Now, the other important aspect about history, the Quranic perspective, is that history, in fact, begins even before Adam alayhi salam. Now, the question of when did he exist is something we can discuss separately, but history is right from the beginning of time. And it does not begin with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Many of us think that Islamic history starts with Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. In fact, all history is Islamic, and Islamic history goes back to the very beginning of time. The unfortunate part is that many of our recent ulama have ignored history, and they believe that just by concentrating on the religious sciences, that is the sciences of the Quran, Hadith, Sirah, Fiqh, etc., is sufficient, and that would lead to our salvation in the Akhirah. But the issue is that in order to achieve Akhirah, you also need to lead a good life on this earth. And therefore, it's so important to learn about this world and about what has happened in the past and to learn from it. So study of human beings on earth and their past is extremely important. Now, other nations, in fact, if you look at every successful nation, that nation has spent a lot of time and effort in learning about human societies, which has given them an understanding in how to control others. Now, the best example that we have is that of the British Empire, which has been probably the most recent one in our memory, and which still impacts us. And we see how they studied us so carefully so that they could, with a few thousand people, control the entire subcontinent. Now, the other important issue is what comprises history, or in fact, Islamic history. Now, the way I have defined it is that it is a study of Islam through time, its effects on man, and its manifestation on Muslim civilizations. Now, this study can be at 5 different levels. The first being the prophets on the one level, and that is what I would classify as a history of revelation. Secondly, you've got the political history, which includes the history of the caliphates, the kings, the rulers, the democracies, and whatever you have. All of that classifies and falls under political history. The third is the intellectual history, which is the history of the muhaddisun, mufassirun, fuqaha, physical and other sciences, and that would be the third level. The fourth being social history, which is the history of the common man, which many of us probably ignore. We think that just studying the political history is more than sufficient. And the last one is the history of chaos, wars, trials, and tribulations, and the history of dissidents, schismatics, and heretics. And those all put together have caused a lot of heartaches for us as well. And we all think that that is also so important to study. But unless you study all of these, then you are not really in a full picture as to what the history of mankind or the history of the Muslims is. Now, the Quran becomes an important source of knowledge about prehistorical man. And in many ways, if you look at it, Rasulullah ﷺ is the only Nabi who was, as stated by the famous Muslim apologist Sayyid Amir Ali, that Islam is the only religion that was born in the clear light of history. All other religions, if you look at them, they are more mythological. You don't have a documented record of any of the great religious leaders of the past prior to Rasulullah ﷺ. And this has caused a lot of issues in the study of history and the study of religion as well. So whatever comes prior to Rasulullah ﷺ, we do have some historical records of kings and others prior to him. But when you look at the history of revelation, you do not have any proper record. Now, history of mankind. Now, this is a Quranic view that the history of mankind must be overshadowed by the history of prophets, a history of righteousness, and a history of Allah's intervention in history. So how does Allah intervene to try to bring about that change that is required to have a good civilization and a good life on earth? Therefore, there are lessons to be derived from history. And as I said previously, Islamic history begins with Adam alayhi salam. And we will also see the stories of Bani Israel and other ancient civilizations referred to in the Quran, and also many others which are not referred to in the Quran, because the Quran is relatively a very short work and that does not directly address every single civilization. Now, the problem is that the modern historian has always tried to emphasize the negative side of religion. And he has looked at religious history as having been superimposed by political history over negative religious developments. Now, negative religious developments, what I mean by is those negative elements that are created by man, not by God, not by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yes, we have gone wrong. We have misused religion. And the modern historian, what he does is that he will impose and superimpose one over the other and assume that that is what is the role of religion in history. So therefore, Islamic history, in their view, becomes a history of caliphs, kings, and petty rulers, along with an array of heresies to show that the history is indeed religious. So their political history and religious history merge, and that, in their opinion, the religion is the heretical side of religion, which is man-made, unfortunately. Therefore, I have had to redefine, and I gave you my definition previously, and that's where I differ in my view on how history should be looked at. Now, one last important point is the issue of biases. We all have our biases. Every single person, including historians, have our biases. And amongst our ideological biases would be political, religious, philosophical, economic, and many others. Therefore, the vision of every single historian is colored. And another important aspect to note is that history is normally, that is recorded history, as preserved, is written by the victor and painted in a way to depict the loser as the real sucker, in fact. So whatever has come down to us even from the ancient times, many of the histories that have come down to us are written in favor of the existing kings and emperors, and whoever was before them was painted in a terrible light. And we start believing that those were the good guys and everybody else is the bad guys. It's almost like Hollywood, where even in our living memory, we know that the Germans and Japanese are probably not as bad as shown in the movies there. And a lot of what's shown in the movies is really fiction. And it's shown as historical fiction, and we are led to believe that that's probably what happened. In fact, it may be far, far from the truth. And this is one very important issue with history, because we are reliant on many of the sources. In recent times, we've been fortunate that they've dug into archaeological sites and tried to verify some of the information. In some cases, they've come up with certain conclusions, but in many others, we just don't have the details in archaeology to be able to rewrite the histories. As far as the Muslim historian is concerned, the classical Muslim historian, that is centuries back, the style of writing used to be to just record reports as it came down to him without comments and without analyzing to ensure that, in fact, that was true or not. His job was just to record the events, positive or negative. They did not rewrite the histories and pick up any of the old books. That's how they're written. Now, they are a dying breed, and the modern historian tries to build the story by taking bits and pieces from various sources, the old sources, and then trying to fill in the blanks in between and trying to make it into a smooth story. So the other problem with the modern historian is that he is not necessarily particular about the authenticity of the source as well, as long as it fits his story. So he might take bits and pieces from one old source that may be totally unreliable and just fit it into a story and say, this is how it is. It's like Salman Rushdie, when he writes his book, and he picks on incidents which are considered to be totally unreliable, and then makes his own story. So current historians are more of storytellers, really. And many of our Muslim historians now rely on what Western Orientalists have written in recent times, which are tainted by their own biases. And Muslim historians have contributed primarily in regional and national studies, Seerah studies. That's where they have been concentrating mostly, but have not really gone into the depths or into encyclopedic works. So there's a need to train Muslim historians and to examine the basis of historical study and produce comprehensive works of history in encyclopedias. I'm sorry. I thought that this is also very important to also just mention. This is my very last slide on general comments. That history, as I said, is a recorded human recorded experience over time. That is, it's a record that human beings have created. But we also know that there is the other very important source of ancient knowledge, which is mythology. And many of us think that myth is necessarily fake or it is false. But it does not necessarily have to be fake or false. It is an extension of human imagination. And it could very well be based on actual events that may have been preserved in folklore and stories that bring out their understanding of their values. So myth is an experience in itself. And the ancient man was very much into it, and maybe at some other stage, in some other setting, I might want to go into more detail as to what is myth and mythology, and what was the experience of ancient man as to how he evolved that. So history and mythology are not totally unrelated. In fact, in many ways, I would say that even recorded history and modern history may not be fact. For some people, Bhutto is a shaheed, and for others, he is the greatest criminal. This is a man who has lived within our own lifetimes, and we cannot decide on what he is. There's no universal understanding, and you'll find a tremendous division. So what can you think about what has happened in the past as to how much of that is so-called myth and how much it is factual history? All right, let me get back to the real contents of today's presentation. I know I've taken a little bit more extra time on this, but I thought this was very important to bring in and put in the real basis, so that even future discussions that we may have, you will have these thoughts in mind as to what is history and how should we be looking at history. So all that I'm presenting today about Bani Israel, excuse me, and early Israelite and Jewish history must also be taken in that light, because I have my own biases. I am not free of bias. I am going to use a comparative view of Quran and biblical narratives, and also certain archaeological sources as well. In this regard, the sources include, other than the Quran and Hadith, as I said, the Bible and other holy books. Some of the versions have changed over time, and original texts are changed or lost, and this we know very well, and maybe in some other lecture I'll go into the details of the history of the Bible and what has changed in there. Also books of history and other social sciences, including classical histories of Herodotus, Josephus, Tacitus, Suetonius, Livy, Plutarch, and many other classical historians. And then, of course, you've got the modern Judeo-Christian historians and scholars of the past 2 centuries who have done their own analysis. And then there are archaeological works about Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Levant, Anatolia, Greece, Rome, and Arabia. So my sources are varied. It would be very difficult for me to tell you exactly which bit I took from what source. Okay, now let's first go into the biblical view about revelation through history. Now in the Quran, we know, we are very familiar as Muslims that starting from Adam alayhi salam right down to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we refer to all of them as prophets or messengers of Allah. The Bible has a very different view. We all think that they also agree with us. Actually, they don't. In their view, all of these great people, right from Adam alayhi salam down to Musa alayhi salam, are not prophets. Please bear this in mind, they are not prophets. They are what they call as patriarchs. Patriarchs are people from whom we descend. They are our ancestors, our great ancestors. They are the great Chaudhries. They are the ones who establish the norms of how to lead a life, and they could go wrong. They do not necessarily have to be the righteous people, but they are the powerful people. They can be sinners. In fact, the Bible records some very major sins. Sometimes we talk about minor sins. We're not talking minor sins. They record certain major sins that were supposedly committed by these patriarchs. Maybe I might give you a couple of examples later on. The other important thing is, according to the biblical view, God created mankind for the sake of Bani Israel, who are generally considered to be a superior race descended through Ibrahim. They are the chosen people. The purpose of stories is merely to establish the superiority of the Israelites over other nations. I'll give you a very quick example. For example, I'm sure you've all heard of Lut alayhi salam, who's known as Lot in the Bible. You may remember that after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot, along with 2 of his daughters, leaves that territory, and the 2 cities are destroyed. And the 2 daughters, after a few days, realize that this is probably the end of their father's progeny, and how could this happen? So the 2 of them, they take some wine and get the father drunk, And the first night, one daughter sleeps with him, and the second night, the second daughter sleeps with him. And both of them are with child, sons. And the sons that are born, who are definitely how you classify as being illegitimate children, are then defined in the Bible as the progenitors of, let me see, I think it's the Edomites and the Moabites, I think so. So those two nations are then defined as being the illegitimate nations. And this is how the Bible, or the Old Testament, I should say, portrays other nations, and that the Israelites, being of the pure descent, coming from Abraham, are supposedly the higher race, the pure race. Also, this is the other aspect which we've heard again, time and again, even in recent times, that God granted Palestine, the land of that area, to the Bani Israel. There's so many things I'd like to tell you about them, but let me just quickly summarize another important aspect, that there are prophets in the Bible. And these prophets appear after Musa alayhi salam, not before him. And mostly after 1000 BC, which is the time of Dawood and Sulaiman alayhi salam. And Dawood and Sulaiman alayhi salam, by the way, also are not prophets, they are kings in the Bible. Now, these prophets that come in later times, they have various roles, but there are 5 important roles that I can break it down into. Firstly, that they prophesy, they foretell events that are to come. Secondly, they warn and give glad tidings, which is a role that we know of in the Quran of being for the Nabi, that the Nabi does warn and give glad tidings. He may also prophesy and foretell, which we also have, but that is not a primary role in the Quran. They act as reformers, very similar to what we have in the Quran. They are the conscience of Israel, similar to us, and they move in guilds. You have instances reported where you have 400 prophets going all together, trying to go to a place to try and guide people. Now, this is something which is not shown to us in the Quran, but I'm not saying that that is not possible. It's more like, in that sense, closer to a Sufi movement, I would say, just in this particular aspect, not in everything else. So there are commonalities between the biblical view of the prophets and the Quranic view of prophets, but this is only for those prophets who come after Musa alayhi salam. All right, some other important observations. The Quran is not interested in dates or telling a full story. You will see bits and pieces here and there. In fact, if you look at the story of Musa alayhi salam, you'll find it spread out in more than 200 different places in the Quran. And trying to piece it together, put it together, bringing all those pieces is quite a task. And even then, you don't have the full story in the Quran. The only full story that we know of in the Quran is that of Yusuf alayhi salam, all in one place. The Quran uses stories of prophets or historical events only to teach us a lesson, as I said before. And the other important thing is that, unfortunately, because the Quran did not give us full stories, what Muslim historians did was that they relied on the Bible to try to date the events of the prophets, which I think was an error. This is generally known as Israeliyat, or biblical knowledge, that has dominated the Qisas al-Anbiya written by Muslim scholars. So if you pick up a book on Qisas al-Anbiya, there are many written you'll find in Urdu, etc. You need to sift through that data to know what is coming from biblical sources and what is coming from the Quranic sources. Now, as I said, I am going to be using biblical stories and dates, and I will point out where I am using biblical dates, and therefore, we don't have to necessarily accept them. We shall use the analysis of Jewish and Christian scholars to analyze the biblical times and supplement it with Quranic information. Yes, this is a very important point. Many of us think that the Bani Israel and the Jews are the same. They are not the same. And we will see this in the presentation. I will elaborate on it in the next few slides. we need to understand that the history of the Bani Israel in order to understand the origins of Judaism. So Judaism actually comes after the Bani Israel, not concurrent with them. Now, this is how we see the Middle East these days. These are the typical boundaries. You are all aware of it, and I won't go through it in detail. But if I remove the current national names and look at the area of the map, I've kept the boundaries in there so that you have a closer view. And you see in the ancient times, the three main players, we're talking of the Old Testament times, not the time of the Romans or Isa alayhi salam. We're talking of the Old Testament times. You've got Egypt, which was a very important area, Babylon or Mesopotamia, Assyria. And right in the middle was Palestine or Israel, which we will discuss about as to what was its existence and what was its historical position in relationship to the three great empires of Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria. Of course, there were other kingdoms like the Hittites and others around in that area. I'll skip that in a moment, but let's bear in mind that these are three important players which are so critical to the existence of Israel. I was supposed to redo the slide, but anyway, I forgot to do it. But in any case, this is the relationship of all the various prophets. And the important thing that I wanted to show here, if you look at Ibrahim alayhi salam, you can see him in the title there in red. Ibrahim, his two sons, Ismail and Ishaq, he also had other sons. But Ishaq alayhi salam, or Isaac, had the son Jacob or Yaqub, who's also known as Israel. That's the origin of Israel. Israel was, or Yaqub alayhi salam, was the grandson of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and he had 12 sons from 4 different wives. And these are the Bani Israel. And then you have got the others as well, and I'm going to skip through this. I'm not going to go through all of these prophets because at the moment we're not interested. But you can see that Dawud alayhi salam, Sulaiman alayhi salam, Zakaria, Yahya, Isa alayhi salam come in through Judah and Levi. You have Musa and Harun alayhi salam coming from Levi. So there you have that. And I'll skip this here. This is the Bani Israel. Okay, coming to the chronology of the early period. The biblical scholars, based on what they read in the Bible, they assume that Adam alayhi salam existed around 4000 BC, which is barely 6,000 years ago. Now we know that this is probably not true. In fact, it is almost definitely not true because we've seen the remains of humans going back into millions of years. Either that or that Ibrahim alayhi salam is not the first man. That's the conclusion one has to draw. They also still say that Ibrahim alayhi salam is dated at between 2000 to 1700 BC. And about 50 years after Ibrahim alayhi salam, around 1650 BC, the Bani Israel would have moved to Egypt along with Yusuf alayhi salam, Joseph. We know the story of Joseph and Yusuf alayhi salam, that he becomes pretty much the prime minister of Egypt. And after his death, the Jews, or not the Jews, I'm sorry, the Bani Israel are enslaved. These are all 12 tribes. They're enslaved in Egypt, and they remain slaves for almost 300 years, leading to the exodus under Egypt, from Egypt under Musa alayhi salam. So these are some key dates according to the biblical scholars. Please bear this in mind. I'll come back to this. The Quran does not give any dates, as I said, and man could have existed as much as 2000 years BC. Now, Ibrahim alayhi salam, as we know, was born, lived in Haran and Ur of the Chaldeans, Mesopotamia and Iraq. And from there, the whole story as to how he is exiled from there goes on north, then down to Canaan, to Palestine. And while he's there, he also makes a trip to Mecca, where he takes his son Ismail, according to the Quranic story, not the biblical story. But I'm sorry, let me go back. And he also goes to Egypt. the story of Egypt is again, I'll probably come back to this here. So this is another one of the false stories in the Bible, where a man like Ibrahim alayhi salam, who in the Quran is regarded as one of the most God-fearing of people, who was willing to be thrown into the fire by refusing to accept what Nimrod wanted him to believe in. The Bible says that when he goes to Egypt, the Pharaoh likes his wife Sarah, and he says, who is she? And he says, she's my sister, and he lies. A man lies to save his life, though he was not willing to save his life when Nimrod was willing to throw him into the fire in Mesopotamia. So he leaves his wife with the Pharaoh and he goes away. And that night, the Pharaoh who wants to take Sarah as his wife is punished by God. Now imagine this man is trying to take this woman as a wife, and yet he's punished and he gets a disease all over his body. For whose sin? The sin was that of so-called Abraham. That he lied, and God still preferred him and Sarah over the Pharaoh. So this is the kind of dichotomy that we see in the Bible, and there are many other similar stories of other prophets as well. Now coming back to the Bani Israel, the family of Ibrahim alayhi salam, as I said, the two key sons, Ismail and Ishaq alayhi salam, and Ishaq alayhi salam's son, Yaqub, who's also called Israel, or he's Jacob in the Bible. Now he had these 12 sons, and you will see that the descendants of these 12 sons are known as the 12 tribes of Israel, or the Bani Israel. Now the Jews are the descendants only of one of these tribes, which is Judah, not of the other tribes. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Benjamin eventually merges into Judah. So Benjamin is also part of Judah, but effectively, Judah remains a dominant force and the dominant tribe. And the Jews are the descendants only of Judah, and that's why the religion is also called Judaism. It's not called Israelism. The Arabs descended from Ismail alayhi salam. So please remember the distinction between the Bani Israel and Judaism and the Jews. I'm going to skip through this. Actually, this was part of my older presentation about the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. But the only thing I'll say is that the important part in our history is that we know that how the Bani Israel moved from the land of Canaan or Palestine or Judea, or whatever you want to call this land, or the Levant. All of these names are for this same area. When Yusuf alayhi salam was sold to the caravan and he is taken to Egypt, there he eventually he himself is adopted by Aziz, the minister, and or he's known as Potiphar in the Bible. And then we know the story of how he becomes the prime minister himself. And then his other brothers also move and settle down in Egypt, and the 12 tribes are now settled in Egypt. But then, after the generation passes, they are despised and taken into slavery. So that's how Jews come into the land of the pharaohs. Not Jews, sorry, again, I keep making that mistake. The Bani Israel come into the land of the pharaohs, and they settle down there and become a part of that society. I'm going to skip all of this. Now, after those 300 years pass of Jews being virtually as slaves, comes the time of Musa alayhi salam. Musa alayhi salam, his story we also know of how he is left in that basket. The Pharaoh is foretold that the firstborn of Israel must die, and therefore they kill off all of the children. And Musa alayhi salam is left in that basket, goes up the river, and the wife of the Pharaoh saves him and she adopts him. The story goes on as told in the Bible and also in the Quran, of how he rises up in the society. He is to become the next pharaoh, the next king. He is preferred by the pharaoh to be his successor, but then he kills an Egyptian and he is exiled. He goes off into the Sinai desert, and after wandering over there for 14 years, he comes back and realizing that he is actually from the Bani Israel. He calls on his people to rise up and to demand the freedom. And he asks the Pharaoh to accept, according to the Quranic story, not the biblical story, according to the Quranic story, he demands the Pharaoh come to the right path and accept Allah. The Pharaoh does not, and eventually leading to the Exodus, and the Exodus leading to the death of the Pharaoh through drowning. The important parts that I want to point out here are that this is all, according to the Bible, happened around the year 1290 BC, around the time of Ramses I, who was the Pharaoh, and they believe that he was the Pharaoh of that time. And for 40 years after that, that is from around 1290 to 1250 BC, Musa alayhi salam and Bani Israel roamed the wilderness in Sinai desert, and we have the story of the manna and salwa and all of that. And of course, the coming down of the Ten Commandments on the tablets, and they having the law given to them, the Torah. And Musa alayhi salam dies around 1250. They are now poised to move into Palestine. The whole nation is moving across Sinai, and they are mostly as nomads. They're living in tents. They have got no proper civilization or no urban settlements. Every time they're moving from one watering area to another one, along with the flocks. And for 40 years they do this. Eventually they are on the verge of entering Palestine, which is a beautiful area, an area that's got lots of vegetation, and it's got agriculture and everything else. And as they arrive there, Musa alayhi salam dies, and he's succeeded by Joshua, who becomes the leader. So there it is. Now, one of the things various recent Western scholars, I'm not talking Muslim scholars, they talk about where was that crossing and where did the Pharaoh get drowned. Some say if you look at that orange line, that it was right on the left side of the Sinai Peninsula, where you can see that orange line crossing. But then there's another group of scholars who believe that no, they actually went all the way down the Sinai Peninsula and they crossed over into Arabia. You see the alternate water crossing as I've shown there, which is close to not far from where the city of Tabuk exists today. So regardless of where it was, eventually you can see that they move north. Musa alayhi salam dies right at the edge of Palestine, and they eventually end up in Jericho. So when did Musa alayhi salam actually exist? This is a key question. Since we have the story of the pharaohs, of course it has to be the pharaohs. There are about 30-some dynasties of the pharaohs. And the 18th dynasty was from the year 1550 to 1292 BC. And in this period, there are a couple of very famous pharaohs who are known to history. 1352 to 1334 was the period of this pharaoh whose name was, originally he was known as Amenhotep IV, but then he changed his name to Akhenaten. And his wife, Nefertiti, the queen, was his co-regent. She was a very powerful woman. And Akhenaten changed the rules of the game. What he did was he decided to get rid of the entire pantheon of gods that had ruled Egypt. And he turned towards the worship of one God. This is a very interesting story, and it's worth your while if you ever get a chance to read about Akhenaten if you've not read it. And he looked at that one God, the image of that one God in the sun. Though he did not worship the sun, but he looked at the sun as being the reflection of that single deity. So the worship of all the other gods was taken away, and which led to a lot of social and religious upheaval during that time period. Akhenaten was not popular because he wanted to get rid of all the other gods. He was followed. Now, remember this, Akhenaten ruled for about 18 years. And Smenkhkare ruled for a year, followed by Neferu-Aten. Again, you see that he is keeping the name Aten. Aten, by the way, is the sun disk. So you can see that the story of or the religion of Aten is still continuing until the time of Neferu-Aten. But he is followed by Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun, whose face is so visible, and we've seen this in various museums, the gold casket and everything. He became king at the age of 9. Many believe that he was a son of Akhenaten, but some believe that he was his younger brother. Regardless, he ruled for about 10 years and died at the age of 19. He was a boy king, or the boy emperor. And he was also originally known as Tutankhaten, but then he was forced by the religious priests to go back to the worship of Amun, and I'll discuss this in a minute. He changes his name back to Tutankhamun, followed by and Horemheb. You see the dates there. This was the 18th dynasty. And the 18th dynasty ends, and after them comes the 19th dynasty. I'll come to that in a minute. Now, this period of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun is known as the Amarna period. If you study Egyptian history, there is this famous mound known as Tel al-Amarna, where they dug out this entire city, where you'll find it in the Upper Nile area near Luxor, not far from that famous dam. What's that dam called? Anyways, it's the city of Luxor is where you've got a fantastic archaeological remain. And in this area, this is where it was a totally new city that was built by and under the period of these pharaohs there. And Amun was a chief. Amun was a chief god, god of fertility, wind, and the sun. And all the Egyptians would worship Amun. And throughout the 7th to the 20th dynasties, you will see that Amun is the dominant god. He was a member of the 8 deities, and these are known as the Ogdoad. His consorts were Amonet and Mut, and he was kind of a variant of Zeus. We all have heard of Zeus, but the equivalent of Zeus in Egyptian mythology was Amun. In order to give him more prominence, Amun became Amun-Re because Re was the sun. The disk of the sun was known as Re, and therefore he became the supreme god. When you add the word Re, that gives him the supremacy. Now, Akhenaten, as I said, you can see that here in that picture on the right, you see the disk of the sun at the top, and this disk of the sun is showering its rays, the sunlight, down onto Akhenaten. You can see the image of Akhenaten, and behind him is standing Nefertiti. And that's where they are given the enlightenment, if you wish. So he brings in the new religion. And this new religion brings a total change. So Aten, the sun disk, is declared as the sole god to be worshipped, and Amun worship is forbidden. There's a very famous hymn that was written to Aten, and that hymn is preserved. It's very similar to the Surah Fatiha that we find in the Quran in many ways. And also, what's that? The prayer, the Lord's Prayer that you find in the Christian and Jewish worship, very similar to that in many respects. It's a longer hymn. In fact, I wrote an article that was published in one of the journals in trying to compare and see if one or the other had relevance to each other. Now, the city that was constructed during this time was known at Amarna, which is worth seeing at Luxor, is called Akhetaten, a new city which is south of Thebes at the present-day Luxor, as I said. Now, I'm mentioning this because if you remember that during Musa alayhi salam's time, the Pharaoh constructed a new city. If you have seen the movie, The Ten Commandments, you would recall that how Musa alayhi salam was instrumental in having that city constructed as the adopted son of the Pharaoh. Smith Kera reverts to Amun worship at behest of the powerful priests of Amun around 1334 BC. Now, Tutankhamun, as I already mentioned, he bowed down to the wishes and brings back Amunism and Atenism, then is dead after this point. Now, the 19th dynasty follows the 18th dynasty, and after these people, Ramses I, who's the first of the pharaohs of the 19th dynasty, and he ruled only for 2 years, from 1292 to 1290, followed by Seti I, who was there for about 11 years, and then Ramses II, who ruled much longer, that is around 24 years, from 1279 to 1230. No, actually much longer than that. That's, how much is that? It's 66 years almost that Ramses II ruled. That is the longest period. And then we have Merneptah for another 10 years. Now, the reason I've mentioned these is you will see in my next slide as to how various people have concluded. Some of you may have read the book by Maurice Bucaille, who was a famous French doctor who wrote the book, The Quran, the Bible, Science in the Quran, Bible, Quran, and the Science of, I think, a similar title. He converted to Islam, and his basic research was on the pharaohs and what he had found of the remains of the pharaohs. And he had concluded, based on this, the sarcophaguses that he found, that Musa alayhi salam would have lived under Ramses II as the pharaoh of oppression, and his father and his son Merneptah being the one who was drowned, based on his analysis. And the Bible actually says that it was Ramses I who was the pharaoh at the time of Musa alayhi salam. If you look at the dates there, if we are to assume that Smenkhkera was drowned and Akhenaten Nefertiti with Musa alayhi salam's foster parents, you have problems there because Smenkhkera was pharaoh only for 1 year, and Musa alayhi salam was in Sinai in exile for at least 14 years according to the Bible. So we have a problem, although I would like to believe that it is Akhenaten because of that whole monotheistic religion that was propagated in Egypt at that point in time. If we are to assume that Tutankhamun was drowned and Akhenaten was Musa's foster parents, you have another problem because Tutankhamun was only a boy and his body is preserved very well. So we have a historical issue there, or the biblical and Quranic issue. Now, the biblical scholars suggest 1290, assuming Ramses I being the pharaoh. But the problem again is that Ramses I was pharaoh only for 2 years, while Musa alayhi salam was away for over 14 years in Sinai. So how could he have gone away for 14 years and then come back within 2 years? Not possible. Seti I was, if he was the pharaoh that was drowned, and he was Asia's husband, as suggested by Maurice Bucaille, we again have a similar problem of dating there, as you can see. Sorry, that was not Maurice Bucaille, that was the other option. Maurice Bucaille's conclusion that it is Merneptah, while Ramses II was Asia's husband. The problem here is that this gets too close in time with Dawud alayhi salam, and you have chronology problems for a later period. If you study the Bible, you have a lot more events, and to have covered all of those events in 200 years is a problem there. So we have, I just brought out all of this just to give you a feel that history actually is has got so many issues that if you wanted to get to the actual factual side of it, or to determine the actual existence of Musa alayhi salam or any of the previous prophets and when they existed, becomes a real issue in light of biblical dating. For us as Muslims, we of course believe that Musa alayhi salam existed, and the Quran, fortunately, does not give any dates, nor does it relate to any of these events there. For us, it is more of a lesson rather than going to the actual historical certainty there. One interesting aspect I wanted to share with you is that of, you must have heard that in many of the sources that Rasulullah ﷺ is equated with Musa alayhi salam more than he is equated with Isa alayhi salam. And you will see some parallels there. That Musa alayhi salam and Isa and Rasulullah ﷺ both had their own hijrah, Exodus and the hijrah. Musa alayhi salam created a nation and a law, the Torah, and you will see the same with Rasulullah ﷺ. You do not see this parallel with Isa alayhi salam. That was just a little quick side. Now, chronology after Musa alayhi salam, this becomes a very important part there. Now, according to the biblical dating, you have, am I there still? Or am I seeing some problem there?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah,
we can see you, but we've lost the screen. Hello?
And it also shows that his audio is off.
Yes. It's back. We've got you back, Kaisa. We've got your screen back, but we've lost your audio.
It's muted.
Hang on.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, I think there was a little glitch with my internet. Okay, so coming back to this, as I was saying, that according to the Bible, after when Joshua becomes the leader, it takes him about 50 years to conquer Canaan, which is the land of Palestine, and to settle down over there. And so it's between roughly around 1250 to 1200 BC, if you're using the biblical dates, is a period when they start entering and conquering and settling down in Canaan. And over the next roughly 200 years is the period which in the Bible is described as a period of the judges. These were primarily tribal chiefs who were the leaders of the Bani Israel. And this was the period which led to the process of urbanization and settling down and the creation of cities, the cities of the Bani Israel. Now, important periods of this period, and we can go into those details, but again, I'm skipping all of it, is what I'd like to mention is Samuel, who plays a very major part. He's one of the, actually, he's the first of all the major prophets in the Bible, and he's the last judge. He's also referred to in the Quran, though not by name, in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayat numbers 246 to 252. And he's the one who selected Saul or Talut. In the Quran, he's called Talut, who was the father-in-law of Dawud alayhi salam, and he was the first of the kings of the Israelites. Samuel was critical for that selection. And then the second important prophet that is mentioned in this period is Nathan, who was there at the time of Dawud alayhi salam. So right after Samuel comes Nathan. What's happening here now? Okay. Yes. Now, before since we're talking of this period, as I mentioned to you earlier, that these people, during these 200 to 250 years, were mostly living as nomads while they gradually started settling down into cities. But the typical manner in which they would be there would be a huge, large camp spread over probably tens of miles, square miles. And they would be structured in this manner. That is, of the 12 tribes, 3 of them would be in the north, 3 in the west, 3 in the east, and 3 in the south. And in between, there would be like a huge big tent and a tent camp where the Levites lived. And that's where that particular tent, it was a portable tent, which was known as the tabernacle. Whenever the waters would dry out or they did not have enough grass, they'd move to another land and the structure would still remain the same. And the tabernacle was the center of their life. This was the place of worship and this was the holiest place for them. And it was extremely important because that represented God, that represented the center of God, similar to what we have as the concept of the Kaaba. Now this tabernacle typically was like this. That is the main tent, which you see the rectangle on the left. The front part was known as the holy place, and the rear part, which was kind of enclosed, was the Holy of the Holies. And the Holy of the Holies contained the Ark of the Covenant, which we refer to as a Tabut Sakina or Tabut Sakina. And that box had those the tablets of the that were given sent down to Moses, which had the 10 commandments on it. So that was considered to be extremely sacred because those stones came down from God. And they were taken around everywhere they would move, and that was the source of their strength. Now, right in front of the holy place, you see this, it says this circle there, that's a lave. A lave is what we would call as the wuzu area, where they would first wash themselves and make sure that they are clean. And to the right would be the altar where the masses would all gather. They would not go into the holy place. Only the priests could go into the holy place, but the rest of them, they would worship at the altar. So this was the typical structure of the covenant. And we'll see that this same structure was preserved in the Haykal-e-Sulayman that comes later on. Now, as they started settling down, we see that they spread out as well, as they occupied the entire land. And the 12 tribes, you can see that they were settled in this map, right from north to the south. They eventually spread out. And the important one to remember is, please note where Judah is. Judah is where the eventual center of Israel became, and that's where Jerusalem also is. And they take on the significance later on. The other nations in that area, they were not the only ones living there. You see the Phoenicians, the Philistia, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Midianites, the Hittites. All of them lived in the area all around them. So they were living very much with them. And all of these other nations also had some relationship or the other to the Israelites. Now let's come to the period after the settling down. After the settling down, around the year 1020, Talut in the Bible, Saul in the Bible, he's anointed by Samuel as the first king of Israel. And he remains the king for 20 years. This is the period where we know of the battle that happens between the Israelites and the Philistines, and the story of how Dawud alayhi salam kills the giant Goliath, the Jalut, that whole story that happens around the year before 1000 BC. And Dawud alayhi salam, a boy, he eventually marries the daughter of Talut, and he becomes the king according to the records that we find in the Bible. He's the king for 40 years, from around 1000 BC to 961 BC. And Sulaiman alayhi salam is the next king, his son, for the next 40 years from 961 to around 922-21 BC, roughly. So this period of 1,000 years, 100 years, is dominated by these three kings, 20 years for Talut and 40 each for Dawud and Sulaiman alayhi salam. Approximate dates there. And these are biblical dates, as I said to you. Most likely these dates are closer to the truth because you do have certain archaeological records as well that do point to these various developments. Now, in the Bible, both Dawud and Sulaiman alayhi salam are considered merely as kings, and Dawud is considered to be a wise king and a great warrior, not a prophet. He unites the northern and southern tribes because by this time the tribes have started to dispute amongst each other and trying to get superiority one over the other. And he uses great diplomacy and multiple marriages to control Israelites, Philistines, and other nations. He's considered to be a just ruler in the Bible, and he is the conqueror of Jerusalem. He moves the Ark of the Covenant. Now remember the Ark of the Covenant, the Tabut al-Sakina. He moves it to Jerusalem, and he sets up a main temple there along with the proper priesthood. And the Zabur, which is referred to in the Bible as the Psalms of David, are supposed to be his poems. They do not ascribe it to the actual words of God, though we look at Zabur as the actual word of Allah. But for them, they are poems written by David. Along with this, you also have, as I said, the Chaudhry element in there, and where they have negative images in the Bible, which is not consistent with the Quranic view. So, for example, David is supposed to have committed adultery with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, and he kills his own son Absalom for the sake of power. This is not consistent with our belief that prophets are above sin. Sulaiman alayhi salam has great significance again. He is the one who constructs the Haykal or the Masjid, the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, and he enforces a law and he establishes rituals, develops other economic projects and mines for copper and gold, tremendous economic development, trade routes. He builds the largest copper refinery and had a monopoly over its production and trade. A charismatic leader, to say the least. He had multiple wives, according to the Bible. They say up to 700 wives and 300 concubines. I wonder how that's physically possible, but that's how the Bible reports it. He had control over trade routes on both sides of the Red Sea, right down to Yemen. So both along the African coast as well as the Hijaz area. So the Hijaz route, which controlled the trade of incense and gold, by the way, while African coast controlled the trade in ivory. Sulaiman alayhi salam, they show various negative elements in the Bible as well, similar to Dawud alayhi salam. And they show that he is power hungry and he gets his own brother killed. He's got many foreign wives who are Moabites, Sidonites, Ammonites, Hittites, which show him as being led astray. And they also show him as worshipping other gods according to the Bible. He built temples for other gods to please his foreign wives also in the Bible. And he is allegedly the author of the Song of Songs, the Ecclesiastes, and the Proverbs. And if you've read the Bible, the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon is rather a kind of a pornographic poem, which does not look like it's really coming from a man of the caliber of Sulaiman alayhi salam. The picture in the Quran is totally different of Sulaiman alayhi salam. If you read the stories, and I'm going to skip that, I will leave it up to you to pick up the Quran and see how he is portrayed in the Quran. Though, of course, the full story of his life is not shown in the Quran, which is not the purpose. Coming back to the Haykal-e-Sulayman, remember how the tabernacle was the tent in the Bedouin period or the nomadic period of the Israelites. When the Haykal-e-Sulayman was built, it was built on the same pattern. The building was approximately 135 feet long, and that's 90 cubits. And you had the Holy of the Holies and the Holy Place and storerooms all around. And you can see what it says, the sea. The sea is similar to the lave, and you had the altar, and you had those couple of pillars there, and those are some dimensions. So very similar. And he also housed the stones right there in the Tabut al-Sakina in the Holy of the Holies, and which remained extremely important for the existence of the Israelites. That was a source of their strength, and everybody believed that this was truly the stone that was sent down by God. The Haram in Jerusalem, as it exists today, you see that there are two important buildings. There's the Dome of the Rock and the Masjid al-Aqsa. A lot of people confuse, and they think that the Dome of the Rock is the Masjid al-Aqsa. It is not. Let me show you a closer view of this. This is the whole Haram area as it exists. And the Wailing Wall is one of the walls, or the outer walls. This is where it is. See, the Masjid al-Aqsa, I've marked it, and the Dome of the Rock, which is known in Arabic as the Qubatul Sakhra. Now, where did the temple actually exist? Let me go back here. A lot of people think that the temple exists under the Dome of the Rock, but some say that actually it is under the Masjid al-Aqsa, because remember the dimensions. It's only about 100. It was a small building. It was not a very big building, only 135 feet long. So it could not have been under this whole area of the Haram as it exists today. This is a view of the Wailing Wall where the Jews currently come and offer their prayers and worship. All right, let me jump next to the death of Sulaiman alayhi salam. Sulaiman alayhi salam, as I said, died in the year 922 BC. And the next 200 years was a very interesting and difficult period. The kingdom of Solomon, or Sulaiman alayhi salam, was split into two. This is known as the schism. The schism in Israeli thought is extremely important because there was a clear break between the tribes, and two clear political entities were created. The northern kingdom, called the Kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom, known as the Kingdom of Judah. Now, the Kingdom of Judah had only two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, while Israel had the rest of the 10 tribes. And Israel actually was the northern kingdom, was a richer one, that was a much better land, more fertile. So they had all the riches, while Judah stuck to the old elements. There was essentially, another important aspect was that the descendants of Judah remained in control of, descendants of Solomon remained in control of Judah, while Israel was controlled primarily by the generals. So we had coups after coup in the northern kingdom. Let's look at, I'm just giving you quick names of those. You can see a lot more stability in the south because there's only one dynasty that is ruling, starting with Rehoboam, who was the son of Solomon, and his descendants. And there are, during this roughly 200-year period, you see that there were 12 kings of the south, the kingdom of Judah. So in that sense, with the capital of Jerusalem, they were a lot more stable. Whereas in the north, you will see that there are about 20 kings here and so many dynasties. You can see again, before the name of each king, I've written 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. That tells you the dynasty. So, for example, the first dynasty was Jeroboam and Nadab, 1 and 2. Then Nadab is overthrown. Baasha becomes some other general. He becomes the king, and his son Elah becomes the next king. They overthrown Zimri, who's a one-man dynasty. Then Omri, he is a 4-man dynasty, and so on and so forth. You can see. So you can see that there are so many dynasties, and they are all generals. Maybe Pakistan learned from them. So that's how it is. And eventually, what happens was that in the year 722, 721, the northern kingdom of Israel comes to an end, where Assyria occupies the kingdom of Israel. They are destroyed completely. And I'd like to discuss this in the next couple of slides there. But before I tell you about the destruction of Israel, the important aspects and practices of the north. The north was rich and it had very good agricultural lands. Jeroboam established temples at Bethel and Dan with 2 golden calves. So there was cult worship, and the kings virtually stopped the worship of Yahweh and moved more towards the other gods. They stopped their visits to the subjects from visiting the Haykal-e-Sulayman, which was in Jerusalem, in Judah. And the worship of Baal became common. Now, Baal is a kind of a chief god, and we could go into more details on that, but there were many gods, and amongst them, they were all known as Baal, but there was one particular that was known as the chief Baal. Other things became very common, which were considered to be anathema in the Israelite religion, that is drinking of wine and other immoral acts, which were forbidden in the 10 Commandments, as well as in general law, became very common. Kingship would change hands within 50 years from one family to another, through murder, intrigue, and several dynasties that ruled. And the interesting part is that if you look at this whole 200-year period, you see that most of the prophets that are mentioned, the minor prophets that are mentioned in the Bible, they were sent to the north, to this land of Israel, not to Judah. And every successive king was backed by a prophet, but eventually that prophet would withdraw his backing whenever the king would sin. So you had this love-hate relationship between the prophets and the kings, where the prophets would try to lure them and tell them that, look, why don't you come back to the straight path? And they would not. And this is the situation that existed. Some of the famous prophets of that area that are mentioned, and you'll find their books in the Bible, are Elijah, who's Elias alayhi salam, Micaiah, Elisha, who's Al-Yasa alayhi salam, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, Micah, and a few others. Some of these prophets even cursed the kings and Israelites for their sins, for the worship of Baal, and for breaking the covenant. Some of the prophets warned against destruction of Israel, and some prophesied, but the kings did not take heed. They thought that this is all nonsense. We are very powerful and nobody can touch us. So eventually what happens is that in the year 722, 721, Assyrians under Shalmaneser V and his successor Sargon II, during the invasion, Shalmaneser V dies and Sargon continues on with the invasion, and they invade Israel and they occupy it completely. The state of Israel comes to an end. Israel had its capital at Samaria. So it was completely conquered, and the people who inhabited this land, the 10 tribes, disappeared in history. Nobody knows what happened to them, what was their fate. They are referred to as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. There are many theories. Some say that the Khazars in Eastern Europe are the descendants of the 10 lost tribes. What do you call them? The people in Utah here. What's their name? The Latter-day Saints. Sorry?
The Mormons.
The Mormons, yes, the Mormons. The Mormons, the prophet of Mormons, in the Book of Mormons, he says that the Red Indians are the descendants of the 10 lost tribes. Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani says that the Kashmiris and the Afghanis are the descendants of the 10 lost tribes. So it's up to you. You take your choice, but a lot of people believe that they were massacred and they, all of them, either taken into slavery or massacred completely. We don't know. There's no factual historical record of what happened to this population, and they disappear from the face of history. And from now onwards, all we have is the state of Judah, the southern kingdom that remains. I'll discuss Judah in a minute, and also we will see, you'll see that the Assyrian Empire, the dotted line represents how the Assyrians were in the year 824 BC, and by the year 640, they had spread out tremendously. And the kingdom of Judah, though it remained independent, was like an island in the middle of the Assyrian Empire. Somehow the Assyrians did not occupy them. Now, Judah, after the destruction of Israel, after the fall of Samaria, the northern kingdom, for the next 125 years, we have these, how many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8. 8 kings. And there was a tremendous influence from all around, and there was a decay that started in Judah as well. There was only one tribe left, Judah, and that's from now onwards, Judaism is born. It is no longer Israelites, it's no longer Israelitism or the Bani Israel, it is Judah. So this gradual moral decay and a weak authority and influence of Assyria and other neighbors takes its toll on Judah as well. It leads to corruption, worship of other gods, syncretism, and the loss of values in the south as well. Many prophets now start appearing in the south, and they want Judah of a destiny similar to the destiny of Israel in the north, but they do not take heed. Now, it so happens that these kings are still remaining within that same dynasty, the dynasty of Solomon. Now, in the year 597, everything changes. In 597, now it's another nation that occupies Judah, and this is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon. He marches his armies onto Judah, and he occupies Judah, and he destroys the Haykal-e-Sulayman, and the Ark of the Covenant disappears. Some say that it was Nebuchadnezzar who took the Ark of the Covenant to Babylon, but there is no clear historical record as to what happened to the Ark. As we all know, that the Jews, and particularly the Zionists, are trying to search for it. Some believe that it is buried under the Dome of the Rock. Some believe it's Ethiopia. Some say it's somewhere else. And they're all searching for the Ark of the Covenant because they believe that that has a real power. The power of God exists in that Ark, and it is so important. The other important aspect is that between 597 to 582, although Babylon occupies Judah, they do not kill them. What they do is that, of course, I'm sure there must be a number of them that were killed, but the entire population was exiled, deported en masse to Babylon in South Iraq. Now, this is the second very important term. I'd say the third, Exodus, the schism, and the exile. The exile exists in Jewish memory tremendously because the period before the exile and after the exile is totally different. So if you read Jewish history, you read the pre-exilic and the post-exilic history. The exile was for around 60 years, from 597 to 538 BC, and they remained in this state of slavery virtually in Babylon. This was the period when you see a kind of remorse that exists amongst the Jews. And this is the period also of the prophet Ezekiel. He's referred to in the Quran as Zulkifl. That is, most scholars believe that Ezekiel is the same as Zulkifl, though this is not 100% confirmed. Now in 538, there is a change. The Persian emperor, Cyrus, conquers Babylon. And he is considered to be a kind of a liberator for the Jews, as he allows the Jews to return to Canaan. And he also allows them to rebuild the Haykal-e-Sulayman, which had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and razed to the ground. So although the Haykal-e-Sulayman was rebuilt, they did not have the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was lost. And it was rebuilt as in a slightly different architecture, but it was there. The important point to remember is that from 597 onwards, the Jews remained slaves or subjects of one nation, one kingdom or another. and they never gained sovereignty again until the year 1948, when Zionist Israel was created on Palestinian territory. So for around 2,550 years, the Jews were the subjects or slaves of other nations. There was no Jewish nation.
Great. So this might be time for me to just, Kazi Sahab, as earlier mentioned, I'm just giving you a 90-minute time check as you requested by you. So it's been.
Oh, yes. Okay. All right. I think, let me see, how many slides do I have left here?
Up to you.
I have around 10 slides. I would like to, if possible, just conclude these slides very quickly and then bring my presentation to a close, and then we can have question and answers. As I said, that there's so much material to cover, but let me try and finish these 10 slides quickly there.
Sure, sir. Just a time check as requested by you. I mean, take as much time as you like.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Appreciate it. So the Babylonian Empire, as you can see, with Judah in the middle, with the Median Empire on the right and Egypt still remaining on the left. This is how the Middle East was at that point in time. Now, what happened was that the Persians, as I said, had taken over from the Babylonians in the year 538, and for the next about 200 years, the Jews who were in Judah, they were given a sense of an autonomy, a level of an autonomy, and they had their own governance, but they remained as satraps of the Persian Empire. They were ruled by a priestly elite, a Jewish priestly elite. And this is a very important period because this is the time when the books of the Old Testament, which includes the Torah and the Zabur and others, were compiled. Though they were not canonized, they were canonized much later. In fact, they were canonized 90 years after Isa alayhi salam. You'll be surprised to know this. But this was a period when the Jews tried to take back everything, and they tried to consolidate under the law of Moses. This is also the time of Ezra, who's known in the Quran as Uzair alayhi salam, who lived around 400 BC. And he is credited with a lot of the stability that came into these lands during these 200 years. The administrative language of the Jews changed from Hebrew to Aramaic, and monotheism was practiced very, very strictly during this time. So in many ways, this was a period of coming back for them. Now, in the year 332, which is after these 200 years lapse, a very important event happens. That is, Alexander the Great comes onto the scene. He invades the entire Middle East, and he builds a tremendous empire, though he lives very short. 332 BC, he conquers the Persian and the Egyptian empires, including Palestine, and he dies in the year 323 in Iraq, on his way back from India. Now, the Jews remain in turmoil, trying to regain independence or autonomy, while Alexander was occupying these areas. And we will see that the next period, which is from the year 332 up to 63, all a little less than 300 years, less than 3 centuries, is a period where Judaism gets influenced heavily by Hellenistic thought and culture. And there's a tremendous change that is brought about in their thought, in their writings, and in their laws. So whatever happened during the previous 2 centuries, is now changing once again because of the massive Hellenic influence. I just wanted to show you the extent of Alexander's empire. You can see how far it extended all the way. And when he died, it disintegrated. He could not leave behind one single successor who could take his empire on. And there were many, many principalities and kingdoms that emerged, but 2 of them were significant. There were the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids towards the east, and you can see this in this map. There you have the Seleucids on the right, the purple areas, and the Ptolemaic Empire to the left on Egypt. Now, Judah was controlled and occupied by the Ptolemies. The Ptolemies were the kings over this land, and from 323 until 198 roughly, about 125 years roughly. And they were also Macedonians, though, and from the same area as Alexander, although they were ruling over Egypt. Egypt had lost its own rulers by this time, after Alexander. The Seleucids, around 198, they took over from the Ptolemies, although they were also Hellenistic, also from Macedonia, and they occupied Judah. So the Hellenistic influence continues during this period, and Judah is now part of them. So from 198 to 165 roughly, though actually the Seleucids continued. This was a direct rule for about 30 some years by the Seleucids. And after this period, what happens was one of the Seleucid emperors, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, he outlaws Judaism in the year 167, which leads to a revolt by Judas Maccabeus. There is known as the Maccabean Revolt. And Judas Maccabeus was killed in 161 in battle against the Seleucids. And then there is a level of peace that is developed, and the Maccabees gained autonomy in Palestine, but still remaining under the Seleucid rule until the year 140. Now in 140 to 63, that's roughly about 80 years, another Jewish family, the Hasmoneans, become the successors of the Maccabees, and they rule over Judea semi-autonomously, and they pay tribute to Seleucids, though they are kind of autonomous. So in a way, this is a slightly higher point for them because they have more autonomy now than they ever had over the past few centuries, though still not 100% independent. Now, in the year 63, the Romans occupy this entire area, and the Roman Empire, as you can see, was the major empire that ruled all over the territory from the year 63 until the year 323. I will not go beyond 323 now, or in fact, I will not even go to 323. Just a few key incidents I'm going to talk about. After 323, it becomes a Byzantine Empire that rules, which is also Roman. But I'm talking about the Roman Empire from Rome that ruled until the year 323 in this area, including Palestine. In the Roman period, we have the Hasmoneans are crushed by the Romans in the year 37 BC. And Herod, who's a Jew, is appointed kind of a king. He's called a king, but actually he was not a king. He was more like a satrap under Roman rule, and he rules from 37 to 4 BC. This is the time when we're coming close to the birth of Jesus. And some of the key, I'll not be talking about the rise of Christianity or conversion in this lecture today. We hopefully, if I get an opportunity, I will discuss that in another session. But there were two very important events that happened after Isa alayhi salam. This was started during the reign of Nero, the Roman Emperor Nero, the crazy guy, in the year 66, when the Jews revolted against the Romans. And Titus, who was a general, the son of Vespasian and Titus both became Roman emperors later on, after Nero. Titus led his armies, first Vespasian, then Titus, and they defeated the Jews in the year 70, when Jerusalem was occupied once again. Herod's temple, which was a successor to the Haykal-e-Sulayman, was completely destroyed. Well, the Tabut al-Sakina still did not exist. Nobody knew where it was, but the temple was destroyed one more time, the last time, before it was rebuilt by the Muslims as the Haram area a few centuries later. The second major uprising happened around the year 132. Actually, it happened a little before 132. And Bar Kokhba, who was the leader of the Jews, he was pushed to Masada near the Dead Sea, where he was killed eventually. And this year, 132, marks a very important event in the Jewish history and memory. It leads to the diaspora, because the Jews are all expelled, almost all of them are expelled from the land of Palestine and dispersed all over the Middle East and some parts of Europe. They're not allowed to come back and settle in this area at all. So 132, the year 132 marks a complete change, that Jews lose Palestine even as a place of residence. It is the Muslims in the mid-7th century who finally start allowing the Jews to come back to this area. So this is my last slide pretty much. I thought I'd give you a graphical view of the rise and fall of Israel. If you look at it, around the year 1600 BC, the Jews are at a height, and in felicity, they are in a state of being rulers. Gradually, they are enslaved, and for around 200 to 300 years, they remain in that state. Around the year 1300 BC, and again, the dates, by the way, are all biblical dates. These are not actual factual dates. Around the year 1300 BC, the time of Musa alayhi salam, the Exodus happens, and that leads to nation rebuilding, and they're again at the height. And between 1000 to 922 BC, that is the peak, I would say, the golden age of the Jews under Dawud alayhi salam and Sulaiman alayhi salam, when they are the most powerful nation probably, or at least they claim to be in that area. The schism, division into two kingdoms, gradually the decline leading to the year 922 to 722, and in the year 722, when Israel is destroyed and the Assyrian invasion, 10 tribes are lost. Kingdom of Judah again in decline. 597, they drop down back into slavery and are under exile, and they remain in this way until this time, except for the very brief period where we see the Hasmonean period and a couple of revolts. Other than that, they never were able to really regain any kind of power. So this was a view, and the diaspora. The Jews define the history by these very important terms, and they show how they claim to be the oppressed people. That is the Exodus of Moses, the schism of 721, the exile of 597 to 538, the diaspora of 132, the Holocaust of World War II, and the anti-Semitism. So they have coined wonderful words, and that gives them the power to be able to reclaim whatever they want to claim. Those are very, very powerful terms, and even today, you cannot get away from these terms, particularly the last two now, which are more recent for us. The Quranic view is that the Jews oppressed themselves through disobedience to Allah and His prophets, and through arrogance and corruption, and thus lost the status of the preferred nation. That brings me to a close, and I know that I would have loved to give you a lot more detail, but still I thought that I should be able to cover this. And if we all, inshallah, find this interesting, I will take us on to the next period of how Christianity developed, the time of Jesus, and how Christianity changed in the initial first 3 or 4 centuries to what it is today, and how the Christianity divides itself into the different churches and the 3 or 4 major sects. So I will skip that for now, and inshallah, I hope you have some interesting questions for me.
Absolutely, Kaisa. That was a thank you again on behalf of all Pakistani alumni of MIT and our lecture series committee. This was really a masterclass, and I guess reminded us all of trying to drink water from a fire hydrant. There was a lot of information compressed in that just over 90 minutes presentation. I'm sure there'll be lots of very interesting questions. I got a couple of calls from friends saying that, is it on, and send us the recording, and they didn't feel appropriate to ask you questions without going through the whole recording. But we look forward to having you again. Thank you again. And now the floor is open for questions. I would request people to kindly try to, if possible, to unmute themselves and to share the screen. To show themselves as well. Please go ahead.
Qazi Sahab, I have a question. I used to go to Jerusalem from 2008 to 2016. My last trip was in 2016, and I was just near the Western Wall, which you showed. Just above that is Mosque, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and below that is where the Jewish people pray. And then there is a little section where you can go and look at old scrolls and so on. One of my guides told me that in the stones, and they are, by the way, excavating underneath that area, and some of the people there are concerned about the Aqsa Mosque. Anyway, what he was telling me, and this is my question, that during the time of Solomon, during the first temple that you call, I think you, Haykal or whatever you mentioned.
Haykal-e-Sulayman. That is our term, but I mean, you can call it the temple. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first temple, they have found actually shapes of serpents. So leading the scholars to believe that during the time of Solomon, in that temple, they were worshiping serpents. And then I thought, well, Moses had his own serpent who ate all the other pharaonic serpents. So is there anything related to this in your studies, or you would consider that, historical truths or untruths? But that's what, I mean, this is from actual excavations.
Yes, I understand. You see, the problem with excavations is that you can surmise anything as you want as to what could be the significance of finding serpents or remains of serpents over there. I mean, even if you, for us, we also believe that if you dig up a grave, anybody's grave, you might find serpents there who are giving the punishment to the person who's in the grave. So it depends on your view as to how you look at those remains. Far more important than just talking about serpents is if one were to find actual written elements, or they're able to date certain things, certain types of sculptures and other things, that might lead to a better conclusion, even though none of that is 100% for sure. It all really depends on who's doing the investigation and what is the foundation or the theory that he's trying to establish.
Thank you.
I have one question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Go ahead. So I wanted to ask, where is the Samri, the Jadugar in all this? Because I know it has been mentioned in Quran, and then the other one also about where they were, when they were worshipping the camel, the she camel.
Right. You see that I skipped through all of those Quranic narratives here. The incidents that you're talking about are the incidents of Musa alayhi salam, the period of Samiri, and also the problems that the Egyptians faced. That entire story, I mean, we could go over the entire events of Musa alayhi salam's time. I was just trying to give an overview of the history, because I had so much to cover. But that period would be the time of Musa alayhi salam, before the Exodus. The Exodus, according to the biblical times, as I mentioned to you, was around 1300 to 1290 BC, according to the Bible. So if you want to date it, it would be prior to that. It would be before the Exodus actually happens. The Exodus, if the more important parts of the Exodus, after that series of events when Musa alayhi salam goes to the Pharaoh, he invites him to accept Allah, and the Pharaoh refuses. It leads to one pestilence after the other. You've got the river turning to blood, and all kinds of pests appearing, and so on and so forth, and these snakes and serpents, all of those. I think there were about 7 or so pestilences, if I remember, they're mentioned in the Bible and the Quran, that happens. And after that, when eventually the Pharaoh, he decides that he wants to get rid of Israel, and he orders that the firstborn of Israel must die. Again, this is the second time it talks about the firstborn of Israel must die. And when that happens, if you have seen the movie The Ten Commandments, it's, I think, shown in a very interesting manner, where Moses, don't remember the exact word, but he says that he has brought the curse upon himself. And that night before, or the next morning, the soldiers of the Pharaoh was supposed to go and kill all of the Israelite firstborn. That night, death comes over every home. And Musa alayhi salam says to his followers, please mark your doors if you are a follower. So death does not enter those homes where the doors are marked. And death goes into every home, including the home of the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh's firstborn dies. And the movie shows it interestingly, where the queen, who in the movie is showing that she had actually fallen in love with Moses, she takes the child who's dead, and she takes him to the Pharaoh and says, you have killed my child, my son. And he takes this child and takes him to Ammon. Remember the god Ammon, as I told you about. There's a big statue of Ammon, and he puts this child into the lap of Ammon, says, give him life. And of course, the stone cannot give him life. And he said, that's when he gets angry, and he orders that go and destroy the Israelites. And by that time, the Israelites have started moving towards the Exodus and towards the sea. So that whole sequence of events, actually how it happens, of course, it's all your imagination, because the details are not there in the Quran for sure. And a lot of it that is depicted in the movie is coming from biblical narratives. But the important point here is that I wanted to mention is that that's Passover. Remember, the Jews celebrate Passover every year. The Passover is that when death passed over the homes of the Jews, those homes that were marked, and they were spared death, but it entered the homes of the Egyptians who did not accept Moses. So Passover is probably the most important event or the celebration of the Jews every single year. That's what it refers to, the Passover. The Passover is a passing over the death, passing over the homes of the Jews, and leading on to the Exodus. So the Exodus is related to that. In Islamic or the Muslim narratives, we find that Rasulullah ﷺ equates the Exodus and the Passover to the 10th of Muharram. We have various stories or narratives given in the hadith, which says that the Prophet ﷺ used to fast on the 9th and 10th of Muharram for the sake of his brother Moses, because that was the day of deliverance for the Bani Israel. So before the fasting of Ramzan became compulsory, the fasting of 9th and 10th of Muharram was compulsory for all Muslims, where we related ourselves to those Bani Israel who were Muslim. In the Muslim parlance, all those people prior to the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam who believed in Allah and who followed their prophets are Muslim. So the Bani Israel are related in that sense, and the 10th of Muharram needs to be celebrated, other than, of course, the great martyrdom of Imam Hussein, but in prehistory, relating it to the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is the connection there.
Great, thank you. And I think Anwar Hussain Saab had a question.
No,
now.
it's okay. My question was answered.
All right.
Yeah, this is Zubair. May I ask you a question? Yeah, Kazi sir, thank you for a wonderful lecture. I think आपकी आखिरी slide बहुत ज़बरदस्त थी. I think it positioned the Bani Israel argument against the Quran argument. So I was thinking about that slide. What lessons do you think we can get from that slide, or just the history as Muslims? from the story?
Well, this is a very loaded question because the lessons that one can gain are so many. The Quran, if you look at it, it connects the story of Bani Israel to the stories of other nations of the past as well. They are not unique in that sense. In particular, if you read Surah Al-Araf, you have the various nations of the past, including the Ad and Samud, and the Bani Israel, and the people of Saleh, etc. Their stories are told in there. And each story has a kind of a similarity in that sense where the nations were believers and then they fall astray and they go towards their own destruction. And that destruction is also related in many ways to the story of Adam alayhi salam, the story of arrogance, the arrogance of Iblis, leaving aside of the story of how the apple and the snake, etc., happens, which are minor details in my opinion. The actual major detail in there is that where a man or jinn equates himself either to God or raises his own ego to the point where he is so arrogant that Allah does not accept it. And we see this again today amongst our nations, whether it be Muslims or non-Muslim. I think we Muslims are also in the same category today, where we have assumed that we are the ones that have control over our destinies, and we do not need Allah at all. We think that our intellect is superior to His intellect. And we are extremely arrogant. And we see this, of course, in the United States today, the arrogance that we see in the system, though they've got so many excellent elements within their systems, which is giving them the strength. And every nation, if you study the nations over the centuries, you will see the key elements that provided that. And as far as the Jews are concerned, they have been extremely intelligent in trying to portray themselves as the oppressed party, even when they were the oppressors. And they have utilized fantastic propaganda. Their propaganda through these terminologies. It's like, when today you want to put somebody else down, use some very strong words. Call the Muslim a terrorist, call him a fundamentalist, call him a whatever. So you have the negative side of those. And then you use certain terms to bring yourself up. And like it happened even during the communist era. I remember very well when the communists would call the capitalists as the petty bourgeois. And these people would call them the commies, and they still do, and various other terms. So the war of words is so important in changing the destinies of people. And we'll find a similar kind of a thing even where the Quran also uses some very strong words one way or the other. So human language and words are so important. And that's what I wanted to bring out and combine that with the whole thing of how we should, in light of the Quranic teachings, change our own thought process and look at what has happened in the past. I hope I've I don't know if there's a lot more I could say, but I'll stop there. I'm sure many others would be able to comment better on this question as well.
Yeah, very well said, Kazi Saab. Everybody is equal, and we respect everybody's right to live and exist, and just as long as they don't step on other people's rights. Very well said. And I believe Saima has raised her hand. Saima, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much, Kazi Saab, for that incredible presentation. I just wanted to ask you about the priestly classes, because I have a friend who comes from the Kohens, and he tells me about their family coming from, they're priests and they come from Musa alayhi salam's line. I mean, how did the priestly classes evolve, the rabbis and the priests? And I think there were, quite a few priestly classes. So when did that emergence happen, under Hazrat Uzair alayhi salam or Hazrat Zulkifl alayhi salam? Is it, or was it earlier?
Yes, they are primarily, with whoever are the priestly class, they're mostly the Levites, the descendants of, mostly, like I said, not all of them, but they're mostly the Levites, the descendants of Levi, one of the 12, and they were really reduced down to a very, very small minority. But yes, you're right. This was mostly, that class developed during the time of Uzair alayhi salam. And that, as I pointed out, was a period of stability for the Bani Israel, although they were no longer in power. But that was a period when they were able to regroup and reestablish as to what is the law and how that law should be. Many of the other works that you see, other than the Torah itself, developed during that period and also periods after that. But yes, there would be developments of priestly class in every age, but this was a time when the priests became probably the most prominent amongst the Jews.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other comments or questions that you might have?
Nazir Saab.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Assalamu alaikum.
Why,
Yeah, Kazi Saab, one of the questions that I think it has been raised in the forum as well, from listening to your presentation, very extensive, very insightful. So one of the questions which comes is, how did these Judah's tribe, a kind of side of Israelites, right? I mean, survived so long, remained cohesive, understood their problems. And now, I mean, at least in our time, they have such strong influence everywhere. I mean, wherever they have gone, they have really gotten into the kind of fundamentals of the society and have great influence. So it's very, kind of interesting that how a group of people can remain cohesive and actually shape the past, and shape the path of history in this way. I mean, I don't know what will happen tomorrow, but I mean, at least today, that's the situation. What is your, I mean, or at least some understanding of, that how did they survive so long, 2000 plus years, and still kept their, wits together to, get into the right professions, do the right things, focus on the right stuff, right? Very hard.
Yes. Yes, you're right. One of the things I would say, probably, if you look at the other nations, I mean, again, I'm giving you only my own analysis, which may not be right. But if you look at other nations, most of the other nations survived on the basis of physical power. And that led to the rise and fall as well. Whether you take the Mongols, you take many of the Turkic tribes, or even the Europeans and elsewhere, you find that they rise based on sheer physical power, not on intellectual power. The Jews and the Bani Israel had the great advantage, I would say, of building themselves on a very strong philosophical base, which starts with the Torah. And they retained essentially the elements of monotheism, and they did not get into fantasies as much as many of the other nations did. Look at any other nation, they somehow the others slide away. In fact, even amongst Muslims, we find today that so many of us have gone into various forms of shirk. We tend to get into supernatural beliefs of things which are not related to reality. And we rely a lot more on those. And when you get away from that, so every civilization, as I see, that way it has gone to its heights, it has relied on a solid base, and it has also developed its thought process based on perceived facts, let's put it this way. And they have developed the sciences, they have developed the knowledge base, and they have moved forward. The Jews had their problems, like I showed you in the graphical way as well, where they had their decline. They had moved away to a great extent from the origins, and they had gotten into many other things that the others were doing. This happened even after Isa alayhi salam, and over the past 2,000 years, the Jews could not come back into prominence. They remained the subjects, but they understood, I think, that there were certain things, if you wanted worldly success, you have to succeed in those. Whether it is finance and trade, it has to do with money matters, it has to do with intellectual matters. And over the last century or so, I think they've excelled in understanding the key factors that provide worldly success. Though they are such a small population, but you find that almost every single Jew is well trained to be within that particular sphere. We don't find this in any other nation. Except, yes, I would say probably there are some sub-communities, smaller communities in different religions who may have a similar view. But by and large, if you look at the larger communities, I think they have failed to grasp this and try to focus on what brings about that success on earth, at least. We're not talking about the akhirat. And that's how I look at their potential success.
Yeah, thank you very much. And one of the things I think, if I might try to summarize in my mind what you said, it's really good. So then when a small group of people who think that they can't win by sheer physical power, right? Because they don't have it, because the other majority has that, right? So then they try to focus on things which are actually not physical, which is basically intellectual and philosophical and understanding, and they make their domain that area, and then whatever comes out of it becomes their, kind of wealth, or they fight with it or utilize it for their success. I think that's a new insight. Thank you very much.
Right.
Thanks.
Pasha, I think you wanted to say something.
Yes. Very pertinent question you asked, Nazir Saab. I like that question. I have an experience. There was a Jewish friend of mine who came to visit me in Mersin, Turkey, when I used to live there. And not very far from Mersin, Turkey is a place which is the birthplace of St. Paul. And there is a home and a well. So I took him there, and he looked around and he commented to himself, there can be no Jew as dangerous as a misdirected Jew. He said that. And so I asked him, why did you say that? He says, well, he was misdirected because he forgot that we have more than anyone else. And I said, what do you have? And he says, we have the law. We have the law, and we are the chosen people. There is no delusion of us, and we don't delude with others. Then I reflected on it, and that's the way I would like to answer your question. There is nothing as powerful as being told you are the best. And when you raise your children, you find that, and I think when God himself is telling you are the best and I won't have a covenant with anyone else, I think they use their intellect, to the most. And I think that could be kind of like an indirect reason. What do you think, Kazi? You know more.
Well, I think that's a very important point you raised. Giving the self-confidence, even the Quran in many ways tries to do that when it calls upon the Muslims and says, "Kuntum khaira ummatin ukhrijat linnas," that you are the best of of people that has been created amongst all of mankind. Why? Because you call towards the good and forbid evil. So there is a purpose there, and that is defined, and you are encouraged to become the best of the lot. This is what the Quran says about the Bani Israel as well, that the Bani Israel were also called on the same path. And when you get that confidence where you are encouraged and you start believing that, then you try to work towards that and eliminate the negative elements from your own life and seek towards that path of success. So yes, I agree with you very, very much. I mean, there has to be a clear purpose that is defined, and you're made to believe that yes, you can achieve and you can do it. So that determination, self-determination, can lead to that success.
Well said, Kazi.
Thank you, Kazi.
A lot of ethnic groups, the in-tribe versus the out-tribe, it's there in a lot of groups, but the Jewish people have done very well on that, and we should learn from them, and everybody should do better for their own tribes and for humanity.
Right.
If the questions are slowly dying down, I'll request fellow MIT LSE member Fadl Abbas to give his concluding remarks.
No, I think, the questions cannot die down because this topic is very, very extensive, right? So, but just, there are many people, who might have questions. One of the things which comes into my mind is that when you really look at minorities anywhere, Ismailis, right, for example, is a minority in the Muslim group, right? Even and then they do good and the majority doesn't do as good, right? Because I think it's the same principle that Faja Saab and Kazi Saab, you basically mentioned, that they really see themselves that this is the only way to survive, right? And if you, the majority thinks that, yeah, we have the power because we are too many, even the democracy basically, kind of enhances the same idea, right? Always minorities, if they are reasonably sensible, have always done better, right? So how can you split the society in such a way that they really achieve their potential without fighting among themselves?
So I think the key word you used there was reasonably sensible.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
True.
And very good examples of the Ismaili community, I think it's the Bora community or the Gujarati speaking community, they're exceptional.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, just to quickly ask a last question, Kazi Saab, I promise. The special status of the Jews, did Allah Ta'ala revokes it in Quran? I know Rasul, after Rasul Pak Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's coming, because he's the final prophet and is a Khatam al-Nabiyyin Mursaleen. But sometimes, when I read the Quran and I see, Allah Ta'ala mentioning the special status according to the Bani Israel, I see the grammar, the tenses are, the way we read tenses in translation sometimes are lost. I get a sense as if that privilege is not revoked. They are punished for, their wrongs, and God hasn't promised any exemptions to the Muslims, from any of the trials and tribulations of other nations if you don't, if you're not obedient. Sorry for going on and on, but just I want to have your view. It doesn't have to be a logically most verified view. What's your view on this?
No, I'll give you how I understand this whole concept there. You see, the Quran talks about what is known as a misak, or a covenant. And every nation was given that covenant, including the Bani Israel, and we Muslims have been given the covenant. And the first covenant was given to all of mankind even before we were born. When proverbially, as you put it, before even Adam alayhi salam was born, We were all asked, we existed back in time when Allah asks, am I not your Lord? And the Quran says, Bala, that yes, indeed, we all acknowledge at that point in time that we have accepted it. We accept him as our Lord, and we accept to do right and not do the wrong. Now this misaq, or the covenant, was given to every nation, and that is the misaq, that what is it? Believe in me and do good deed, do the righteous part. Now that's a summary of it. So the Bani Israel were given the same thing. You can see that in Surah Al-Baqarah, where it talks about how the Bani Israel were invited, and that because they were on the right path, because they were on the right path. Don't forget this, that the Bani Israel were not an erring nation. Generally, they were on the right path. That is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted and elevated their status. And when they revoked that and went back into the ways of those who had done wrong, that was revoked. And this is true for any nation. This is true for us Muslims, that even though the Quran says that we are the best of nations, but we would not be the best of nations if we were to get away from that misaq. So that's why Islam, if you look at the word Islam, what does Islam mean? Many people say Islam means peace. Actually, Islam, yes, it comes from the word salama, which means peace, but it comes from the fourth root of the word salama, which is aslama. Islam is the noun that is derived from the verb aslama, and aslama, if you know Arabic, it means to accept. So, well, like for example, if I were to make you an offer, do you accept my offer? It could be a trade deal, any deal, and you would say, yes, I accept. And the word in Arabic is aslamtu, and I accept it. And this word is used exactly in the same way in the Quran, where the Muslim accepts. He accepts, but the acceptance here is not on equal terms, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so much superior to us. That is why many people translate that as a commitment, a submission in the sense that my acceptance is a submission, because I cannot say that I am on equal terms with Allah. So that is the key difference. So the acceptance of that covenant, where Allah has said, believe in me and do the righteous deeds, and I will reward you accordingly. And if you reject me, then you will be punished accordingly. And I said, oh Allah, I accept. Aslamtu. Aslamtu means I accept, and I am a Muslim. I am the acceptor. I am the submitter. So that same connotation goes through the same thread, whether it is the Bani Israel, whether it is the Muslims, whether it is any nation on earth that existed right from the time of Adam alayhi salam until this time. That is the Quranic view.
So I think we are at about 2.5 or close to 2.5 hour mark. I think if there are no questions, perhaps we should conclude the session.
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, Fazal Saab. One thing which is perhaps should be kind of a part of this recording. I mean, I want to ask Kazi Saab this personal question, that how did he, I think he specialized in chemical engineering, and then he went back to, I think Islamic Institute, so what made you change that? What was the motivation for doing it? And how did you accomplish this? Because this looks like your specialty. The other one is just like a sidekick.
Actually, I think you came in a little late. I don't remember who asked me this question.
I am sorry. Yes, I did. Yeah, sorry.
But I did answer very, very briefly. But that itself is a long story, and my journey as to how all of that happened. Maybe what I'll do is someday I will post an article on my own experience as to how that happened. But I'll repeat very, very quickly what I said in the beginning. Just a 1 minute answer, though it should probably be much longer.
I will review it. Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. So what I said was that it had a lot to do with the fall of East Pakistan. When I started rediscovering myself, that's what eventually started leading to questioning myself, my own existence and my own identity. So inshallah, I'll write about it in more detail some other day, and I will share it with you.
Thank you. Very good. Sorry to interrupt, Fazal Saab.
So I think we're going to conclude the session again. Thank you so much, Kazi Saab, for giving us a very broad historical overview, starting from Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam to the start of Christianity, and then particularly focusing on the Bani Israel. We look forward to your second session about the history of Christianity. And I would mention that we are so blessed to have such a knowledgeable person amongst our midst, and to benefit from your extensive study and knowledge. Again, we really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for everybody who attended.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.